In this era of grave spiritual crisis, it is not enough to simply...
I live in college, so I'm around.
Yeah.
And that's half of it. Just
Cultural foster care program. SSI does more than match children with foster carers. They create connections that honor culture, religion, and identity. Learn more about becoming a foster carer at ssi.org.au/fostercare or call 1-800-299-447 because every child deserves to feel at home.
The Voice of Charity would like to thank our current sponsors for their ongoing support. And if you would like to become one of our sponsors, please contact the Voice of Charity office on 9625 6111 or email us on voc@voc.org.au.
In this era of grave spiritual crisis, It is not enough to simply know about your Catholic faith. That is why we need a Catholic Toolbox to equip us with the practical skills necessary to live our Catholic faith to reach our ultimate goal, which is heaven for all eternity. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Join us every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. for the Catholic Toolbox as we hand you the tools to go forth, live the faith, and change our modern world today. Live on the Voice of Charity. And welcome back to another week on the Catholic Toolbox, the art of practical Catholicism. I'm your host and founder, George Manassa, here as we equip you with practical tools to live your faith in our modern world of today. And this week, I have a very special guest, Dr. Xavier Symons, live here in studio to speak about life. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, George. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's always great to have you and see you. And we actually go back. We've known each other for a very long time. I think it goes back to 2011 or 12. I
think that's right. So over a decade now, and it was great to reconnect after I came back from the US. So
exactly.
Yeah, good on you for all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, it was great, and you have such an amazing journey with your career, and I'm really excited to speak to you tonight about it. I think we met in 2012. You were studying philosophy at the time, and you had gone away to Harvard and all sorts of things, directions, and then you're back here in Australia. And do you want to start off by introducing yourself to our listeners? Who are you?
Sure, no worries. So my name's Xavier Symons, and I am a bioethicist. As George mentioned, I have a background in philosophy, and currently work in the area of bioethics or healthcare ethics. So basically, bioethics is concerned with ethical issues arising in medicine and healthcare. Also, more broadly, ethical issues concerning the way in which we respect life in human societies at the beginning and at the ending and all the way through, all the way in between. And also, importantly, bioethics is concerned with the evaluation, the ethical evaluation of new technologies or new ways of treating disease and illness, which often are very good things and help us to help people who are very ill, but also sometimes give rise to ethical challenges, and that's where people like myself come in. So I actually am director of the Plunkett Centre for Ethics, which is a joint initiative of ACU, the Australian Catholic University, but also several partner organisations in the Catholic health and aged care sector, and we advise them on these kinds of ethical issues.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. It sounds like a really fun job.
Yeah, it keeps me on my toes, and definitely it's very intellectually stimulating. I'm very glad to be in the role. So
yeah, no, you got to keep your mind working, especially. And you spent some time in Harvard.
That's correct. Yeah, so I was in the US for a few years, and I spent 2 academic years working for a social science research institute called the Human Flourishing Program, which was within the Harvard University system, and that was an amazing experience. I thought a lot about some very fundamental questions about what makes a life good, what human flourishing amounts to, what makes a life worth living. And actually, interestingly, I think that's a question that we're going to talk about this evening in the context of euthanasia, because really, I think a lot of big bioethical debates turn on the way in which we think about that question, what makes a life worth living. And we have a very particular way of thinking about that in the Catholic ethical tradition, and I think that informs our views on a whole bunch of bioethical issues. So
I think that'll be the first question that we ask. But I wanted to mention to our listeners that you are also the headmaster of Warrain College.
That's right,
University of New South Wales. And congratulations on the appointment very recently.
Yes, just started this year as master, and it's a great opportunity, I think, to try to also do some pastoral work, not unrelated to the work I'm doing at ACU, insofar as Wehbee is a residential college on the campus of the University of New South Wales, and all the students are university students. But I think like what I really like about my Wehbee work is I get to know the students a lot better. I mean, at a university, typically if you're a professor, I mean, you might teach some classes, but you don't get to interact with the students much outside of that. Whereas I think at Wehbee, you get to like forge these great friendships and be a good mentor and a good example for these young fellows, these young leaders of tomorrow. So it's a real privilege in that way. Very glad to be in the role.
And what does it mean? Is life worth living? What does it mean to really live?
Sure, that's a good question. Well, I think we can start with our faith, right? And we can start with Scripture. I mean, I'm not a Scripture scholar, but from what I understand, from what Peter Kreeft, the great apologist, has taught me about Scripture, is that there's at least two words for Greek words for life in sacred Scripture. One of them is bios, which kind of means more like biological life. So you think of biological life of plants and animals, or the lives of a cell, the life of a cell, or kind of other basic forms of matter. But then there's a richer concept of life described in sacred Scripture, which is described using the word zoe. Zoe. Like the idea of kind of life as an experience, as a vital energy that propels us forward, and ultimately grace, the life of grace, I think, is and life in the Spirit is something that's captured by a word like Zoe from the sounds of it. So. And I think that's an important distinction, because I think if you're a materialist, if you're someone who believes that there is nothing but matter in the world, you're probably going to think that life or living just amounts to something like bios, just kind of raw, biological, material kind of existence, cellular life, and nothing more. Whereas I think if you have a richer anthropology, and a faith, a kind of a more transcendent spiritual outlook on the world, you're going to see life in that richer sense of a participation in something greater than just material life, a participation ultimately in the life of God, in the life of grace. And I think like that's an important starting point. What I would want to say though to the audience is that I don't think you have to be a person of faith to accept that there is this richer way of living, of existing. Because I think in the end, we definitely find an analogue for what we in the Catholic faith experience when we participate in the life of God, just in the way in which in the secular world, people feel much more alive when they have a sense of meaning and purpose in their life, whatever that is, right? It could be family, they want to be a good mother or father, to their kids. It could be friendships. They're really invigorated by the great friendships that they have. It could be their work or some greater purpose that they've discovered in their work. But I think to live in that richer sense definitely seems to relate to this idea of having a strong sense of purpose to your life, a kind of a cosmic understanding of your reason for being in the world. And that is a really important thing, I think, particularly in a world like our own that we're living in right now, where there's lots of challenges and lots of kind of instability and war and whatever else, and even sort of just challenges that people seem to face at a local level as well, with whatever it be, kind of financial pressures or addictions or relationship troubles. I think to have this strong sense of purpose and way of making sense of suffering ultimately within a broader understanding of our purpose for being is really vital, so that when things do get difficult, and even when you face something like a terminal illness, that you can find hope in that.
I mean, people want meaning in life. Essentially, people are looking for meaning, or people feel very fulfilled when they find meaning in their life beyond just living and existing. Essentially, you could call it just existing or going with the motion, going to work and not having a higher purpose. Is that ingrained in us? in the natural law, where as humans we are trying to look for something of greater meaning and significance in our lives that we can devote ourselves to and look for. Does that not indicate that there is an actual purpose to life? If it's indicated, or we could see traces of it in the natural law through human desire, like a common human desire.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's very Augustinian in a way that we have a sense, a God-shaped hole in our hearts, a sense that we're made for something greater than what we might initially encounter in our lives. And I think that definitely just the desire for a greater meaning, I don't know if it's so much of an argument for the existence of God as a kind of powerful reason to believe in that our faith gives us that. So, it could be both, really.
Yeah, because, I mean, speaking to somebody over the week, trying to explain this, he was trying to explain that, you know, the desire in us is really biological. The bios, you know, it's just a collective human experience. We've just evolved to want some meaning, but there isn't really meaning in our lives. It's just something, it's like an emotional coping mechanism or something. I mean, it was very interesting. It is a very interesting conversation. It is very deep to think about, but let's continue on the trajectory of life. Why is life sacred that we need to defend it? We need to rally around defending life and human dignity in general.
So, I mean, I think maybe a good starting point with that question is to think about the alternative. Let's just say that life isn't sacred. What do we lose as a society when we have that belief? So, I mean, I think we can start with vulnerable population groups in society. What implications does that have for people with disabilities? What implications does that have for children with intellectual disabilities? What implications might it have for the way in which we treat the people who are older, frail, children, the very young children, the people who are homeless or suffering from drug addiction, people who suffer from mental illness? What implications does an abandonment of a core commitment to human dignity have for society? And I think what it entails is that these people's lives aren't treated as having an intrinsic value, that they end up very, very, not just vulnerable in the sense of kind of their condition, like their health condition or whatever else, but vulnerable in the sense of social vulnerability. There's no longer a default commitment to the idea that all human life has value. And I think when you look at the question in that way, and you see what we stand to lose when we lose this foundational Christian value, I think it's can all hopefully agree that that's not a society that we will want to live in, that we will want our children to grow up in, that we would want our grandparents to be living in, or whatever else. So I think that one of the reasons why we need to defend human life in the sense that you put it is that we stand to lose so much if we don't, and also we stand to gain a lot if we do. That we are creating a more humane society, which is a great place to live for everyone, and that's something we can be proud of as Christians. Tom Holland, the English historian, has written a book called Dominion, how Christianity made the Western mind, I think is the subtitle. And he basically argues that the reason why we have the sorts of institutions that we have in the contemporary world, which defend vulnerable population groups, like laws to defend kind of like against discrimination, or good social welfare, and social support for people who are unable to work or support themselves in various ways. The reasons why we have all of these things is because of Christianity, ultimately. And I think it's a fairly compelling argument.
Absolutely amazing.
And he makes the point that even in a culture which seems to be trying to get about as far as away as it can from Christianity, you still have Christian commitments implicit in the sorts of arguments that are being made against Christianity. It's a sort of bizarre situation where we are just so like intensely Christian in our heritage that you cannot but be influenced by it in some way or other.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. So you translate that to today. Centrelink somewhat to a degree is
I would like to think that it's right. I mean, in the end, like the sort of both political parties have strong Christian roots, both of the main political parties, and I think the sorts of social infrastructure that we have in Australia was inspired.
Centrelink, nursing homes. What else do you like?
I think
help with education,
social. That's right, exactly. And even the NDIS, for all its failings, these sorts of things. Like, we can argue about the specifics, but I think there's Christian principles
in principle
behind these things. So,
I mean, it's absolutely amazing because many societies, and I think society is turning this way again, especially in the Roman Empire. It was a survival of the fittest. You know, if you couldn't look after yourself, you couldn't fend for yourself, you perish. You know, it's the survival of the fittest. But Christianity changed all that when we saw a collective responsibility, you know, for the elderly, for the vulnerable. And that's a beautiful society that we want to live in. Those true Western values that are slipping more and more in our society. But we're turning back that way.
Yeah, that's right. So I think we need to cherish that, and we need to remind people today of the alternative, because I think that's part of the issue. Is we take these things for granted today, and in fact they're not to be taken for granted. Sadly, I would argue that there are some places in the world today that don't have a Christian heritage, and where people are treated terribly. At least sort of certain segments of society are treated as second-class citizens, and that's something that we need to be cautious about happening in our own life and our own sort of society. And I think, as a bioethicist, I would say the two biggest blind spots of our culture with respect to the dignity of human life are at the beginning of life with abortion and related procedures, and then at the end of life with euthanasia and a kind of misunderstanding of what it means to provide quality palliative care versus actually actively ending the life of someone, and understanding the implications of that.
Because if you stop and think about it, if you don't value life, if we don't see a dignity, at least, it doesn't take being a believer or a Christian or any religion to see this. If we hone in on our humanity and see that life is sacred, there's something special about life, then we care about, from birth, the very start. And we might actually take seriously, sexuality because it leads to life. If you really think about naturally and how it flows, we will start to respect our bodies a little bit better because from our bodies during our life, and in the sexual act leads to life. And then the implications after, conception, and then throughout life, living with treating other people and ourselves with dignity. Whether in any kind of context, and then at the end of life, if you just stop and think about it, when we value life, our life, not just being a living organism existing, but actually having a purpose and a dignity, it all starts to flow very beautifully.
Yeah, that's right. I would completely agree with that. And as you say, things make sense. Things start to make sense because we believe that the universe has a rational structure to it. It has a kind of a plan that's implicit in the way it's been designed. And the fullest expression, or the kind of that's most true when it comes to human beings and human nature. That human nature hasn't just kind of isn't the product of blind evolution. It's the product of God's design. And as a result is profoundly meaningful down to its core. And And so, as you say, like in the context of sexuality, it's not that the church believes that sex is unimportant. It's actually that the church believes that sex is like more important. than
But I'm saying for the natural law, if you're just looking at it, I think a lot of people from experience and speaking to many people can reason to the fact that my body's sacred, and, and the sexual act is actually important. We've got to treat it with dignity, maybe in the context of marriage or a commitment, which brings forth life, and we've got to respect that life that's come in, and then you live your life, and then what about the end of life, leading to looking after grandparents, family. How about helping people that are struggling within their life? Because everybody has a dignity. It's just beautiful. And if we can't value life in and of itself, then our society crumbles.
Yeah, it really does.
How can we tell, as Mother Teresa said, how can you tell people not to kill each other in wars if we don't? We can tell someone that abortion is fine.
Yeah, that's right. I think what you see is a relativism that sets in societies which are inconsistent in their the practical ways in which they seek to enact their commitment to the dignity of human life. And I think we see that in our society, that I think moral relativism is not a problem of 20 years ago. I think it was a problem then, but it's a problem now as well. Yeah. And Benedict XVI was very strong on this. But I think we need to double down on our commitment to objective truth, because I think what's happening, in my view, particularly with respect to the natural law, is we're seeing a kind of pervasive and persistent relativism take the place of natural law commitments that would have otherwise, like have in the past been kind of like default beliefs for people growing up in a Christian culture. And I would say that part of the reason why we've kind of lost the battle trying to prevent the legalization of voluntary euthanasia is because we've lost the default commitment to the idea that intentionally taking another human life is morally wrong, always and everywhere. And indeed, we've lost a commitment to the idea that suffering can have meaning, and that there is an afterlife. Yeah. And
it's always about seeking pleasure as well, our own ego and desires. As Pope Benedict XVI said in his homily to the elector cardinals before he was elected, so we're building a dictatorship of relativism which doesn't recognize anything as definitive, which solely consists of one's own ego and desires. I think that's key when he said ego and desires, because then what drives us anymore? What's the sole motivator is our comfort. It's hard to look after elderly. It's hard to make a commitment in marriage. We're just driven by our ego and desires.
And a desire for kind of like self-expression even. So Carter Sneed, who is an American bioethicist and professor of law at the University of Notre Dame over there in the States.
No, we say it the right way,
That's right.
Notre Dame.
And so Carter wrote a book a few years ago called What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics. And one of the things that Carter argues in that book is that what replaces a kind of a more robust Christian anthropology of acknowledged dependence and compassion and respect for human life. What replaces that ethic in secular liberal societies like our own, like America as well, is a kind of like radical individualism, and he calls that actually an expressive individualism. So it's not just individualism in the sense of I'll do whatever I want. It's like individualism in the sense of I actually define myself through my choices, my kind of radical assertions of the will and expressions of whatever like my deepest sentiments are. And so you see that, I think, in the context of
that's pretty rich.
Transgenderism. You see it in the context of the way in which we do intellectual backflips to justify abortion. And I think you see it as well in the context of euthanasia, like people want to die on their own terms. they want to kind of like craft their death in the way they see fit. And, and unfortunately, I would argue, like, what you end up with is this kind of this understanding of the mysteries of death and dying that's radically unmoored from any kind of sense of the transcendent, and instead is just about like personal preference, and that's a concerning situation to be in as a society.
So now we'll go into euthanasia itself. Why does the church teach that euthanasia is unacceptable from a Catholic perspective?
Sure. So, I mean, I think there's a few reasons that are relevant here. So, one is that we are committed to the idea that as Catholics, as Catholic Christians, we're committed to the idea that God is the ultimate author of our lives. So we do not own our own lives, and so God takes us when He sees fit, and in the end, we need to kind of accept that humbly as Catholic Christians, as an expression of God's will, and indeed accept death as something which, in the end, is a product of original sin, and it's sort of a reality that has been caused by sin, but nevertheless can acquire a kind of redemptive value if we approach it in the right way, with the right dispositions, kind of with God's grace and through the sacrament, like accompanied with the grace of the sacraments, and etc. etc. So that's one reason. I think as well, though, there's this kind of mutual that reason is mutually complementary with the dignity notion that our lives have a special dignity, and there's something like so valuable about human life, given that it's made in the image and likeness of God. Yeah. That to actively end the life of another human being is profoundly immoral. Yeah. And I think that's an important reason to bear in mind as well, because I think part of the challenge with euthanasia is getting people to see that life always has value, that life doesn't lose its dignity, because I think that there would be a lot of people who would say that there are some circumstances where life loses its worth, like life is no longer worth living.
Yeah, exactly. Too much of a burden, to look after an elderly parent.
Yeah.
They're on an oxygen machine, and
they're in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
I mean, to give a kind of sympathetic interpretation, you can understand, considering the kind of internal logic of secularism, how someone could come to that conclusion. But that's the problem, I think, is that the logic is the assumptions are flawed, the sort of principles of that system are flawed, like the idea that basically quality of life is just reducible to the kind of balance of pleasure over pain, or that the worth of life is determined by the sense in which we are still able to satisfy our preferences for how we want to live our lives. And if that's all you're working with, then sure, I mean, you can see how people would come to that conclusion. But surely life is much more than just autonomy and comfort. And I think unless we move beyond that anemic anthropology, that anemic account of what it means to live a worthwhile life, we're not going to really crack the nut of explaining to people how, kind of getting people to see what's wrong with things like euthanasia.
Okay, so there is a foundation, and you set that very well, to understanding why euthanasia is wrong, in the eyes of the church. And really, I think when life has value, just on a practical level, and someone is suffering, and people around them, and families helping, is that not helping, the family come together? There's just practical circumstances where, in my personal life, with family, elderly family members, it unites people. There's many fruits that come out of that. Even though you could look at it as, well, it's just a burden, them being at a nursing home, and they're on their last leg of life, and it's,
why would you prolong
Exactly.
their life unnecessarily. And there's another important point there to make, that the church doesn't say you need to prolong life unnecessarily, right? Like the church says that
Okay, that's an interesting.
you have no obligation to accept aggressive medical treatments where it's unduly burdensome, where it's extraordinary care. There's a distinction between ordinary and extraordinary care.
Okay, sure.
In Catholic bioethics,
Because people would think that you have to do everything you can at whatever expense to
yeah,
save and
which is not
preserve life.
true. Which is not true. I
Okay.
think it's important for Catholics to know that there's a prudential judgment that you need to make, either whether you're a patient or the family of a patient, about what's kind of proportionate given the circumstances to try to restore someone to health, or to try to increase survival.
Yeah.
And if it's basically going to cause you like profound suffering and have limited benefit, then you're within kind of your good conduct according to Catholic ethics if you say, no, I don't want to pursue that treatment. You can pursue it if you want to. Like if you're the sort of person who says, no, I mean, like you're a young person and you think, no, I would, like this three months of extra life would be really valuable to me, even though I may be very sick during that time and very uncomfortable. I really want that extra 3 months, because I mean I haven't been able to do as much in my life as I would have liked to, and so I want that extra time, even though it's going to be mean a lot of pain. But you're not obliged to do that, and I think that's important. So I mean, I would say my advice when it comes to saying anything more specific than that would be to Catholics to consult a priest who has done some study in moral theology, or a Catholic doctor with good kind of criteria for advice at that time, whether it be for yourself or for your loved ones. To just get a bit of guidance on what you are within your kind of within good ethics to allowed to refuse at that point. What kind of
So it's important to distinguish between extraordinary care and ordinary care. Ordinary care is the basic dignity that's owed to prolonging your life or restoring you to health. And then there may be more extreme measures to take that feasibly has to be discerned. That would be the extraordinary.
I mean, an example might be someone who is kind of in their 70s and gets like a bacterial infection that would be easily treated with antibiotics. For them to refuse the antibiotics, I mean, would be wrong. It would not be appropriate. I mean, all other things being equal, because I mean, it's an easy fix and it's very little burden on them. So it would be wrong for them to refuse it. But like, consider another scenario. Consider someone who has stage 4 pancreatic cancer and has already been through several rounds of chemotherapy and radiotherapy and other cancer treatments, and to no effect. And there's an experimental therapy that they get offered. And the doctor says, look, we don't know if this is going to work, but it could. Would you like to try it? Well, in that case, the patient will be open to say yes or no, depending on what kind of goals they have in mind for their final days.
Wow. I mean, this is all very enlightening, and I really want to understand euthanasia a little bit more. What seems to be the greatest challenge, or what did you want to delve into regarding euthanasia? It's a very deep topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think but I would say for the Australian listeners of the program, it's also a very practical topic, unfortunately, because now euthanasia is legal in all Australian states. It's legal in the ACT as well. And I would say it's going to become increasingly common in Australian society. So it would probably be likely that in the next 10 to 20 years that most of us would have some personal encounter with euthanasia, like be it through a friend of a friend or even a loved one of our own who kind of gets offered it by a doctor or who's wavering for whatever reason, maybe because they don't know that much, they haven't had the same formation that we've had or whatever, or they're just depressed. And so I think we as Catholics need to be equipped with good tools for managing talking to people about this issue. And the first thing I would say, I mean, we can go anywhere you want on this conversation, right? But the first thing I would say is that, like, overwhelmingly, the kinds of people who pursue euthanasia are the kinds of people who've lost meaning, who've lost hope in life, who are demoralized, which is actually a clinical category.
Yeah,
It's not just a
wow.
kind of poetic expression.
Yeah.
And what I would say, and what I think is a very powerful argument against euthanasia or for people not pursuing that pathway, is to say that there are much better ways in which we can help people who've lost meaning, who've lost purpose, than saying to them, yes, you're right, your life is like that, and we're going to offer you euthanasia, which I think is just like a really tragic and disappointing solution for our society to offer people who've lost hope.
Because the real danger, I believe, lies in euthanasia is that it extends itself backwards from, okay, someone who's sick and elderly and suffering and going through a lot of pain, the option to end their life. And the temptation creeps back into, oh, well, someone who's maybe 50 and lost hope. It essentially becomes suicidal. You know, oh, what about someone who's 30 and completely lost hope? And it creeps back to any...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to
Category.
also remember that this is suicide. I mean, it's a form of suicide. There are different forms of suicide, but it is suicide, and I think we've got to be careful about the deliberate manipulation of language to try to obscure the reality here. So, I mean, the kind of language that's used in Australian legislation is voluntary assisted dying.
Yeah.
But you're not actually assisting someone who's dying with euthanasia. You're actively ending their life. So
Yeah.
it's not assisted dying. I mean, like, assisted dying would be something like pain relief when someone's dying,
Yeah.
or withholding unnecessary treatments. But I think that euthanasia is something different, right? And that's important to be aware of. And I would say, yes, there is a slippery slope. And 10 years ago, euthanasia advocates would mock people like myself for saying that if you legalize euthanasia for some people, you're eventually going to legalize it for many more. And yet what we've seen over the last 5 years or so in jurisdictions like Canada, in the Benelux region,
European countries?
Is this slippery slope playing out? I mean, we now have euthanasia for children in the Netherlands and in Belgium.
Euthanasia for children?
It's an option. Yeah, it's an option. So
wow.
In Canada, the courts have ordered the federal parliament to allow euthanasia for people with mental illness. And fortunately, even the Liberal Party in Canada, the Progressive Party, has realised that would be a really bad idea and have kind of stalled on the legislation, but it probably will come into effect if they're re-elected in the next parliament. So I believe, or could at least come into effect. So we're starting to see this slippery slope playing out, and even in Australia now, in Victoria, there's been a 5-year review of the Voluntary Assisted Dying Act 2017. And various expansions to, or kind of like amendments to the law have been proposed to try to, I think, water down the safeguards and in some cases make euthanasia available to people who currently can't access it. So, yeah.
Let's talk about assisted dying, essentially. This progresses into assisted suicide.
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, I think...
For any reason.
I think for any reason, yeah. So, I mean, my concern would be that what we might see in the next 10 to 20 years in Australia are attempts to legalise euthanasia for people with mental illness, even for people who are tired of life. It's hard to know how quickly our commitment to suicide prevention will be eroded, but that would be my concern, is that would happen. And
might even be medically protected.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that
So
we need
it
to
really
be
has
aware, 'cause
eroded
it's
very
just,
quickly.
I mean, there's a kind of instability in
Yeah.
our social commitments, and that's hard to maintain for very long, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think eventually something's going to have to give. I mean, either, God willing, we restrict euthanasia more and we kind of get back to where we were, or God forbid, we go the other direction and we abandon our commitment to suicide prevention. But that would be my concern. Look, I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah.
I pray for the best outcome, but I am worried, genuinely worried. Just given the fact that we don't really have a strong normative commitment to point to in our society to try and stop this dystopian situation from arising.
And this all harkens back to the very foundation that life is not valued. The dignity of life is threatened from conception through life and death. That we don't see that there is an inherent dignity to the human being. It's got nothing to do with faith or religion. You know, we are built like that as humans.
Yeah.
Where that there is meaning and dignity to our lives and to the lives of others, which should then dictate and guide our decisions in day-to-day life, to respect life and to value life, whether it's a sick elderly parent and how we go about, you know, their treatment and looking after them.
That's right.
To looking after our bodies from the start, which have the potential to bring in life. I mean, it's quite a powerful thing. Yeah, and having respect for life, whether it's ourselves or other people. I mean, if we re-ingrain that in society, I think the underlying problem seems to be the education system and the formation of families. And that's producing many people in society that think this way, and that they become lawmakers, they sit at very powerful positions, and
Yeah, no, I mean, we
trickles down from there.
We all have a role to play in helping to maintain and preserve a commitment to human dignity, and I think, as you say, like, that's in part something that plays out in the education system in the way we provide ethical formation for young Catholics, for our young people in society generally, and then I think also at the level of legislation as well. It's important for politicians to vote down bad legislation, and regardless of where they sit in the political spectrum, to see that, like, whether you're left wing or right wing, our political ideologies ultimately, like, have at least some elements of Christianity motivating them, and I think that in particular, like, we should all, insofar as we're just decent human beings, be committed to the foundational idea that all human life has worth and is worthy of protection and civic protection.
Yeah.
Protection by the law.
Wow. Because I just think of different cultures around the world, and they have this culture of, you know, looking after children, accepting life, and you know, this, and we had this in the West, and it's been lost. You know, looking after families, fostering a family culture, and then as parents grow elderly, to look after their parents, and you know, many European countries in the Middle East, it's a major thing. Perhaps we need to re-inculture. I don't know what the word is. Re-inculturate. Culturate our culture to value life.
Yeah, I mean, John Paul II talked
life.
about the re-Christianization of Europe that needed to occur. He perceived in the 1980s a increased secularism in European culture, and he talked about how we needed to, as Christians, make an effort to try and re-evangelize these traditionally Christian countries, and I think he's right, like, that we need to make an effort to remind, in particular, our societies of where our values come from. I mean, as Benedict XVI pointed out in the Regensburg Address, that kind of the Greek philosophical tradition and Christian revelation are two kind of foundations of Europe, and it's really impossible to understand Europe unless you understand both of those traditions and the way in which they kind of came together in the New Testament and the early Christians and the church writings of the Church Fathers.
Yeah, and you do amazing work at the Plunkett Centre, part of the Australian Catholic University, and I'm sure you experience many different interesting scenarios, and you're at the forefront of this. But what are some 3 practical tools to our listeners listening here tonight? You've really set the foundation for valuing life and seeing the issues with euthanasia and how it trickles down to eventually to become a disaster on a societal level. But what are some 3 practical tools that our listeners tonight can take away to take action in this area, to really contribute to restoring our society, to value life and work against euthanasia?
So I would say that the first thing that we need to do is we need to talk with our friends and our family and other people with whom we interact in the workplace or other contexts about the issue.
Yeah.
I think obviously when prudent, raise the topic. Like, it's not like we need to go into our workplaces and suddenly start talking about death all the time. Like, I think obviously there's a time and a place, but people do actually want to talk about these things. You'd be surprised.
We've noticed
at the Plunkett Centre. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So
especially over the dinner table.
So I mean, take advantage of it for what it's worth. Like that people. I mean, even if they have crazy ideas, at least they want to have the conversation. So I mean, that's great. And
it's
then
great to have these conversations.
That's right. Carry out the conversation in a civil, respectful manner, but also robust, and don't hesitate to challenge people about their beliefs. And so the first thing I would say is don't hesitate to talk to people and be a witness to life, because we all do have a role to play in preaching the gospel of life. And then I think the second thing I would say is that particularly for health professionals, I think it's important that we get organised and we support each other. I'm not actually a doctor myself, but I work with health professionals, so that's what I'm talking about. And I know that there is actually a new group that's starting to try to act as an advocacy group against euthanasia in Australia. So I would encourage health professionals, if you'd like to know more about that, I'm sure George can share my email with listeners.
Do you want to share any of your details if anybody
I mean, what I would say is just look up my name, Xavier Symons, Symons is my last name. Look me up online, and the Plunkett Centre for Ethics should come up, and you should
Australian Catholic University. The Plunkett Centre for Ethics.
That's right, and you should be able to get my details, or at least get in contact through the emails on the website, and I'd be happy to connect you with other like-minded health professionals who can support you, and you can support them, so that we can at least have a small group, but of a kind of well-formed, articulate, and politically active group of health professionals who are saying that they won't stand for the erosion of human dignity in the health professions, and that they want to have their conscience rights respected, and also to try to provide a compelling alternative, whether it be through providing quality palliative care, or even just by being an excellent doctor who accompanies their patients, or a nurse who's truly caring for their patients.
Wow.
So that's number 2. And then number 3, I would say, is that at the political level, it's important that we all stay informed about what's happening with this issue, because I think I've seen even data on this that for Catholics, like, often there's a big focus on abortion as a bioethical issue, which is great, because I think we need to be aware of what's happening with legislation around abortion in our country and in other countries. So Catholics are very concerned about abortion. They're not as concerned about euthanasia. They think it's an issue, but often they don't. What I'm trying to say is, we just don't tend to have the same levels of literacy. So often I talk to people, really good, decent Catholics who are trying to stay up to date with things, but they just don't know what's happening with this issue of euthanasia in Australia. Like, many Catholics wouldn't even know it's legal in their states. They certainly wouldn't know the details of the legislation.
Yeah. The focus seems to be on abortion.
Yeah, that's
most of the
right.
time.
That's right.
Yeah,
Whereas
that's what people
I would say, like, that this is unfortunately going to probably become just as big as an issue in many ways. The rates of euthanasia will probably be very high in Australia, and its kind of social implications are different, but arguably just as bad. Like, I think insofar as kind of you're seeing from both ends of the human journey through life, a loss of the sense of the sacredness of human life, and slowly that's just going to sort of work its way out until we kind of lose all respect to human life, I fear. So that sounds a little bit apocalyptic, but I mean, and God willing, there's people are good, right? Like Australians are good people, and I think even those who would be in favour of abortion and euthanasia, like, I mean, often they've grown up in environments which have just like completely distorted their ethical worldview, and they can change their minds if you just talk to them honestly about the facts. But we need to be positioned, we need to be educated, we need to be well informed to do that. And so that's what I'm really pushing home here, and those three options, those three practical tips, that we stay engaged. And we don't kind of retreat into our little enclaves and not try and do what we can to protect the dignity of human life in Australian society.
It's very important, I think, to participate in the political process as well, and in whatever capacity or any advocacy groups that you could be a part of. And like you said, conversations with people. It's that dinner table conversation. It's that lunch with a colleague and something comes up and something's happening in their life, to have that personal conversation to change minds. Have you seen minds changed in your time?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah. No, definitely.
Provide us with some hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a nice example, my own sister, she's great, and I mean, not as into her faith as myself, but raised Catholic and identifies as Catholic. And I think on the issue of euthanasia, initially she wasn't really committed, partly because I just don't think she'd thought that much about the issue, or didn't see it as a major priority or whatever. But she just sort of, she wasn't committed either way, so she didn't necessarily think it was a bad thing.
Yeah.
She didn't really have a strong view. So, but she works for a disability advocacy group, and she's a communications officer for them. And she actually, in her work, I think saw something that changed her mind, and it was she was working with someone who had motor neuron disease, and was a kind of like advocate for people with disabilities, and was trying to, in a way, through his own life, the idea was sort of witness to the fact that even with this great disability, you can still live a life that's fulfilled, etc., etc.
Yeah. So you have other examples as well, you know, with
but
people.
Sadly, this guy eventually pursued euthanasia.
Yeah.
So, and
wow.
And the impact on their community was devastating. Like, all these people who'd kind of looked to him as an advocate for the idea that lives of people with disabilities can have value were just like shattered by the fact that he'd chosen to do that. And so I think for someone like my sister, who was a bit on the fence, like, it kind of changed her mind a bit. She saw like that this is not just about you and your choices.
Wow. Yeah.
The way in which you die has implications for those around you, and the way in which they see their own lives. And I think that's maybe a good point to kind of just get back to.
Very much is.
That the way in which we act has implications for those around us. And in fact, like, if you don't respect humanity in your person, it somehow cheapens humanity in general.
Yeah.
At the
It
universal
radiates
level.
around.
Yeah,
to your
and
community.
conversely, if you do respect humanity in your person and those in your small little node of existence, it will have knock-on effects for society generally. So our actions have much more impact on those around us than we can imagine, I would say. And certainly that's true from a spiritual level. So, yeah.
That's absolutely perfect. If you really think about it, I think we underestimate as humans our existence and the circles that we have around us and the impact that we have. We radiate there. And I think it's so important to see that, you know, we do have an impact. And like you said, someone's death can actually have an impact on those around them. And how, I mean, always at funerals, it's interesting. Everybody seems to be self-conscious of their own death or their own mortality. And it's remarkable. And the way we treat our own life and it has implications. It radiates outward. So I think that's a very important thing for people to note. But it is possible to change people's views, and I'm sure in your line of work, if you have many conversations and many other people.
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. It's a great opportunity to be a witness for the value of human life in that way, and I feel privileged to be in the role.
Thank you so much, Xavier.
No worries, George.
Symons.
Great to join you.
It was a great conversation here tonight, and I hope we shed a lot of light on this topic.
Terrific. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Please note, this does not count as any professional or medical advice within this episode. And if you're experiencing any symptoms or any medical emergencies, we do advise you to call your emergency service within your country or within Australia, 000. But thank you for tuning into the show. Don't forget to subscribe. And also, John's reminding me here, I will return live on air on Tuesday the 29th. Of April. Yeah, that's April. So Tuesday, 29th of April at 8 p.m. because we have Holy Week next week and then the week after for the long weekend. So I'll return live there. So thank you for tuning into the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Go to The Catholic Toolbox, wherever you get your podcasts. That is The Catholic Toolbox. And don't forget to go to the website, thecatholictoolboxshow.com. That is thecatholictoolboxshow.com. So until next week, or actually in 2 weeks, God bless, take care, and take action. In this era of grave spiritual crisis, it is not enough to simply know about your Catholic faith. That is why we need a Catholic toolbox to equip us with the practical skills necessary to live our Catholic faith to reach our ultimate goal, which is heaven for all eternity. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Join us every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. for the Catholic Toolbox as we hand you the tools to go forth, live the faith, and change our modern world today. Live on the Voice of Charity.